Okay, so in the previous video, we talked about free market systems and the definitions of a market and the definitions of producers and consumers, and how with very little government intervention, they can operate basically seamlessly, as in theory, of course. And so today we're going to talk about, or in this video, we're going to talk about economic systems like centrally planned economies and how they are different. So we have to first remind ourselves what the key economic questions are. And remember, there are three, and that is what, and that would be great if I can. Okay, and so first, let's look at some characteristics, but review. When we looked at free enterprise systems, we looked at the three key economic questions, which were what, how, and for whom. And so we defined that by looking at free market. How are those questions answered? Well, it's answered by producers and consumers. The consumers decide what they want, and that makes producers decide what to make. Producers are going to figure out how they're going to put it together. They own everything. They accumulate it. And then producers can decide who they're going to sell it to, and consumers can decide what they want to purchase. And that idea that it's really just the two players answering the questions is what defines free market. So how is that different from centrally planned? Well, let's look. So first I want to think Cuba. Oh my gosh, can you look at that beach? Can you just imagine? I mean, it's winter, but it's Arizona winter. So really we just have like dry, cold? I don't know. But I'm imagining beaches. You know, beautiful sandy beaches, the cabanas, the beaches, the tropical weather. But then you gotta think, wait, what? The government's gonna give you a card. And every month you have on that card a certain amount of stamps that you can get that'll decide your essential needs, decide how much of everything. But what if it isn't enough? You run out. You don't have enough spots to get everything that you need for the month. So then anything that you need over that, you have to pay pretty high prices. And that's if you can find it, because, you know, shortages are pretty common, so then you're not going to be able to find it all. How are you going to handle that? How are you going to figure out how to get and meet your essential needs? But that's the basics of centrally planned. And in centrally planned economies like Cuba, you're not then really responsible or really have the freedom to make those decisions. The government answers all the key economic questions. They're going to decide the what, the how, and the for whom. And they own everything that's incorporated in that. They own all the land and the capital, all factors of production, and they decide how it gets distributed. In a free, centrally planned economy, the biggest opposition is against private property, free market pricing, competition, consumer choice, and self-interest, which is literally everything from a free market economy. These characteristics is what drives the free market. So centrally planned economies basically don't like this. So here's an example of how those questions are answered. So first you have this idea. They need to decide uniform military sweaters. Remember, we have that whole production possibility curve and making sure that you can meet, maximum efficiency. You have two goods. And so let's look at your two goods as military uniforms and sweaters. In a free market, you're looking at the producers making this decision to meet maximum efficiency. Well, here, you start off with your top planners deciding that they want more uniforms than sweaters. So then they send that directive down, and then they have to look at really, okay, what's available and how many they can make of one good over the other. And then they're sent to the factories, which are owned by the government, paid by government salaries or really whatever. And then they make the military uniforms. And then when it decides on who's going to get it, well, you have military that's getting the uniforms. Sweaters could go to the store, but then also the government could decide they want to give the sweaters to the military, underneath their uniforms or on top or, just for their off days. But that's just it. The government decides. If you want a sweater, you don't get to decide if you get it. So in a free market, consumer sovereignty, the power of the consumer really rules. But in centrally planned economy, it's not a factor. It's not what drives it. So let's discuss a couple of different types of varying degrees of this government control of a centrally planned economy. So socialism. Now, socialism is not a single economic system that drives it. It's really kind of a combination of economic systems. So in a socialist system, it's really, if you look at a spectrum of like the free market spectrum, socialist systems are somewhere either a little bit to the left or more middle, because you have a belief system that drives it, which is that the wealth should be distributed a little bit more evenly through society, but they don't completely discourage the accumulation of wealth. So when we think about those values like, efficiency and freedom and security, so when we consider the value that's ranked higher in socialist societies, when we think about freedom, equity, efficiency, security, we really do see security being ranked higher, and of course, equity. There's still an essence of the value of freedom, but when you're going to rank them, this is going to be ranked lower. So as I said, socialism is not the existence of one solid market. You do have that combination. So there's like a coexisting aspect with the free market practices. And Sweden is a very good example of this socialist system. Sweden has gone through a lot of changes, but they still have really the combination of the two, and they have what they call market socialism. So there's still government utilizes its power to tax so that there's a redistribution of wealth, and of course they provide a lot of different services, free education, they provide healthcare, they provide these kind of things, and with that comes a cost, because you can't provide these things without being able to pay for it. And how does the government make money? They do it with taxes. So when we look at that taxation, here's a comparison. Now, the United States, we have varying tax rates. We have progressive tax. So the lower tax income, wage earners do pay a lower tax, which can equal, when you're combining federal and state, to about 15-20%. Some of the highest states, when you have California, for example, that has quite a bit, not just income state tax, but then there's some property taxes and some inheritance tax and some different kind of taxes that are involved for high income wage earners. You can, roughly, and that's a roughly because it's an estimation, because there are so many varying municipality and state tax rates that are kind of imposed. It can be up to 52%. So California does have a pretty high income tax rate for its highest income earners. But of course, in the U.S. tax system, you have quite enough. There's some states don't actually charge state income tax. There are various tax credits and deductions that you can file that are going to reduce the tax burden of the American income earner. In Sweden, roughly the lowest is about 30, but the highest can equal up to 44%. They still, of course, have sales tax and other taxes that are involved, but income tax, this is where you have. And so even the lowest wage earner is going to be having a higher tax burden than you would in the United States, but of course has these extensive services available to them. But in Sweden, people also have private property, have entrepreneurship, and those kind of things that drive a free market. So it's not a completely redistributed economy, and that's where that coexistence, that idea of the two markets coexisting operates. So then another definition, or an economic system that falls under centrally planned, is communism. And communism, if you're looking at that free market spectrum, is going to be much further over to the left. So, and of course, as you're going, free is furthest to the right. So Karl Marx, who is considered the father of communism, just like Adam Smith is considered the father of capitalism, was really about this idea that if the government controls and owns all the resources and nobody can really take advantage of those resources, then they can equally distribute those resources through answering the three key questions. And so there's an idea that he's really stressing even further than socialism, equity. So equity is a big thing in communism, and how they answer those questions is to achieve this goal of equity. Karl Marx really does champion the working class, and so that's proletarians, is that working class, or what you called wage earners. The hourly pay, the person who goes to work for the minimum wage. And so he did kind of champion this kind of revolution of the weight of the working class, a rising up of the working class against the bourgeoisie, the elite, the ruling class that subjugated the ones below it. And he was considered very much a progressive of his time, so much that people really did fear the progressiveness, the progressive nature of his theories and of his push towards that revolution of the proletariat.